They found a German Shepherd puppy in a crate marked Lot Number 42, discarded for being too obedient. What dark secrets lie behind the cold orders and broken souls? Follow Mason's fight to expose a secret program and rescue dogs forgotten by the world. This is a story of loyalty, courage, and redemption. The wind howled through the loading dock behind the old factory on the edge of town, where broken pallets and rusting barrels leaned like forgotten bones. It was raining that morning, not the gentle kind, but a steady, cold sheet that blurred the lines between hope and sorrow. And in the farthest corner, where the concrete was cracked and weeds had claimed dominion, there sat a wooden crate. Rough, nailed shut, marked with a crooked spray-painted stencil, LOT number 42. Mason had been working late shifts for weeks now. As a part-time janitor at the shuttered textile mill, he mostly swept dust that would never fully vanish and listened to the ghosts of machinery long since silenced. But that morning he saw something that didn't belong. The crate. He walked toward it slowly, flashlight trembling slightly in his hand. It wasn't the sight of the crate that unnerved him. It was the sound. A sound so faint you could miss it if you weren't still enough. It was like a sigh, or a whimper that had learned to be quiet. Carefully he knelt beside it. The wood was damp but warm. There was breath behind it. He pulled out a crowbar from the shed nearby, heart pounding louder with each rusty nail he pried loose. And then he paused. Something told him whatever was inside had been there a long time. With one last groan of wood against metal, the lid came off. And there it was, curled in on itself like it was trying to disappear. A German Shepherd puppy, eyes too old for its tiny body, ribs visible beneath soaked fur. No barking, no resistance. It didn't leap up or wag its tail. It simply looked at Mason with a blank, practiced obedience. It had learned long ago that making noise never helped. Mason's breath caught. Hey, buddy. It's okay," he whispered. The puppy blinked slowly. No sound, no movement, just a stillness that felt like grief. Taped to the inside wall of the crate was a small note, smudged, soaked, barely legible. "Discarded for failure, too compliant, not aggressive enough. Lot number 42." Mason read it twice, then 3 times. His throat tightened. He reached into the crate slowly, and the puppy didn't flinch, didn't cower, didn't even react, as if it had been taught to accept everything, no matter what. Mason gathered the tiny, drenched body into his coat and held it to his chest. Fear. More like it was trying to hold in something broken. He looked down at the little thing, so still and silent, and whispered, "You're not a lot number. You're a life." The walk home felt longer than usual. The rain seemed colder, but the puppy never moved, never protested. Mason's coat got soaked through, but he held the dog close like something sacred. Back in his small apartment above the old diner, he laid the puppy down on a towel and turned up the heater. "I don't even know what to call you," he said gently, crouching beside him. The puppy raised its head just slightly, watching Mason with hollow eyes. "You don't have to do anything now," Mason whispered. "No orders, no tests, you just get to be." He offered a small piece of chicken. The puppy didn't move for it. Mason sat there for hours, just watching, waiting. Around midnight, he dozed off in the armchair beside the towel. When he woke, the chicken was gone, and the puppy had inched closer, its nose just touching the cuff of Mason's pant leg. The next morning, Mason took him to the vet. The doctor, an older woman with soft hands and kinder eyes, examined the pup and frowned. "He's underweight, malnourished, but what really gets me is this. She pointed to a small scar behind the ear. Implant chip, probably from a training facility. Some of these places, they test for guard instincts. If the dog submits too easily, doesn't bark, doesn't bite, they're marked as failures, discarded. Mason's fists clenched. They called him too obedient, like that was a flaw. The vet nodded. I've seen a few like him. They don't cry, they just wait for the next command or punishment. That night, Mason sat beside the puppy again. This time he offered his palm. The puppy didn't lick it, but he placed his paw gently over it, as if unsure what the gesture meant. Mason smiled through the sting in his chest. We'll work it out together. I promise. He named him Shadow. Not because he was dark or quiet, but because no matter where Mason moved in the tiny apartment, the pup followed, silently, loyally, never more than a step behind. But something in Shadow still hadn't returned. He didn't bark. He didn't play. And when Mason left the apartment, even just to check the mail, Shadow would sit perfectly still, facing the door, unmoving until Mason returned. Mason started documenting it all in a small notebook. Day 4. Ate a full bowl. Didn't flinch when I dropped the spoon. Day 7. Shadow's tail moved. Not a wag, but a twitch. I'll take it. Day 9. Sat beside me on the couch. Rested his head on my knee. I cried. Silently. And so they continued. 2 broken souls. 1 tiny apartment. And a silent understanding growing between them. But the past has a way of finding you. And Shadow's was darker than Mason could have imagined. Shadow had lived in silence for so long that even the creak of old floorboards made him pause mid-step. Mason tried to create a world where nothing hurt, but sometimes healing comes wrapped in its own kind of ache. Over the next week, small victories stitched themselves into Mason's life like thread through torn seams. Shadow began following commands, not because they were shouted or demanded, but because they were whispered with kindness. When Mason said, "Come," Shadow would walk over quietly and sit, never expecting a treat, only waiting for what came next. And when Mason said, "It's okay," Shadow would blink, long and slow, like he was trying to believe it. Mason started walking him each morning before sunrise. They'd go down past the diner, through the rusted-out rail yard, and along the edge of the creek. Shadow never tugged at the leash, never chased squirrels. He simply walked in step with Mason, head low, ears always tilted slightly back, like he was bracing for a command that never came. Then, one morning, something shifted. It happened near the bakery on 4th Street. A kid dropped a balloon, and it popped loud against the sidewalk. Shadow froze, stiff as a board. Mason turned just in time to see the shepherd drop flat to the pavement, tail tucked, belly pressed low. Not panic, not whining, just submission. But what broke Mason's heart wasn't the reaction, it was the stillness after. Shadow didn't get back up until Mason knelt down and whispered, "You're safe. I swear you're safe." They sat there on the cold pavement for a full minute before Shadow finally moved. That night, Mason couldn't sleep. He sat at his old laptop, Googling terms from the note he found in the crate. Lot number 42. Discarded K9s. Obedience rejection. The search led him into the underworld of unregulated training programs, facilities that bred and tested dogs by the dozens, selling the best performers to security firms or military contractors. The failures? Sometimes dumped, sometimes worse. Mason found a name in a court document, Aegis Behavioral K9 Systems, shut down 2 years ago for unethical treatment of animals, based just 3 towns over. No clear list of how many dogs had been decommissioned. Mason leaned back, heart pounding. Shadow had come from one of these places. The scars weren't just physical. They were etched into how he moved, how he didn't bark, how he refused to eat unless told it was okay. The next day, Mason made a call to a local trainer, Becca. She specialized in trauma recovery for working dogs. When she came by, Shadow greeted her with his usual silence, body still, eyes watchful. Becca knelt and extended her hand slowly. "Hey there, buddy. You've been through a lot, huh?" Shadow didn't move. "He doesn't respond to toys," Mason said quietly. "Barely touches food in front of people. Won't sleep unless I'm in the room, but he's never once growled or snapped." Becca nodded slowly. "That's not submission. That's fear mistaken as control. He's not calm. He's shut down." For the next hour, she worked with him, gently testing boundaries. Shadow would glance at Mason after each new thing, almost like asking, "Am I doing it right? Will this upset you?" When the session ended, Becca stood up with a heavy sigh. "He's not just a discarded pup, Mason. He was conditioned for obedience at the cost of everything else. That kind of programming doesn't go away overnight. But it can be rewritten. With love. And time." Mason looked at Shadow, now sitting quietly by the door. "I don't care how long it takes," Mason said. "He's not going anywhere." Later that evening, Mason sat on the floor, notebook open. Day 14. "Let me brush him today. First time he didn't flinch." Day 16. Shadow heard the neighbor's dog barking. He tilted his head, just a little. Progress? Day 18. He touched my hand with his paw. Not because I asked, he just did it. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Then came the knock at the door. Mason wasn't expecting anyone. He opened it cautiously to find a man in a worn gray jacket, holding an envelope. "Are you the one who found a German Shepherd in a crate marked Lot 42? Mason stiffened. "Who's asking?" The man extended a badge. Retired animal cruelty investigator. "Name's Rowan. I've been trying to track the last dogs sold before Aegis shut down. Some were hidden. Others auctioned off illegally. Lot 42 was never accounted for. Until now." Mason narrowed his eyes. "Shadow isn't going anywhere." Rowan shook his head. "I'm not here to take him. I'm here because if what I think is true, then that dog's survival, that's a miracle. And there may be more like him. Still out there." Shadow peeked from behind Mason, watching the exchange quietly. Rowan took a step back. "I have records. I want to show you something. You might be the only person who can help." Mason looked down at Shadow. The puppy's eyes met his, still full of silence, but now, maybe, a flicker of trust. Whatever came next, they would face it together. And Mason was beginning to suspect. Shadow's story wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The sun had barely risen when Mason found himself standing in Rowan's dimly lit garage. Blueprints, case files, maps dotted with red thumbtacks. This wasn't just a rescue effort. It was a man's last crusade. Rowan spread out a weathered file on the workbench. "Lot number 42 wasn't just it was a batch. 12 dogs, all German shepherds. Trained young, like Shadow. Obedience beyond instinct. Learned under stress. The ones who didn't pass were labeled emotionally defective and quietly discarded." Mason clenched his jaw. "So you think some of the others might still be out there?" Rowan nodded. 3 confirmed dead. 2 adopted into homes that didn't understand what they were getting. 1 went missing after being sold overseas. That leaves 6 unaccounted for, including Shadow. Mason's eyes dropped to a photo. A dog, ears too big for his head, stood beside a concrete wall, eyes hollow, collar biting into his fur. Shadow. Smaller, younger, but unmistakably him. Rowan continued. Each dog had a unique microchip registered under Aegis's Shadow network. Illegal, untraceable. But I've cracked a few. There's chatter on private breeder forums. Clean-trained shepherds, they call them. No barking, no jumping, just total control. Mason's voice was low. You mean broken? Rowan looked at him. Exactly. Shadow waited outside the garage, sitting beside Mason's truck, his posture as still as a statue. Mason stepped out, knelt beside him and whispered, There are others like you, buddy. We're going to find them. Over the next few days, Mason and Rowan worked side by side. Using tips from anonymous sources and deciphered serial codes, they compiled a list of potential sightings: shelters, small-time breeders, back-alley auctions. One name kept surfacing: North Haven Kennels, a rural property known for flipping trained dogs to private buyers. No questions asked. Rowan made a call. They won't talk to me. But someone like you? A guy with a clean face and a sad story about a lost childhood pet? They'll open the door. Mason glanced at Shadow. Then we do this together. 2 days later, they arrived at the property. It didn't look like a kennel, just a rundown farmhouse with a barn out back. But behind that barn, faint barks echoed, sharp, restrained. Mason's stomach turned. The man who greeted them wore a forced smile and mirrored sunglasses. You looking for protection? Companion? Guard work? Mason played the part. Had a shepherd as a kid, obedient, loyal, never needed a leash. Looking for something like that again? The man gestured. Then you'll want the trained batch. Come on, I'll show you. They walked past pens lined with barking dogs. But one pen was silent. A shepherd sat pressed against the wire fencing, eyes glazed, tail unmoving. Mason stopped. This one, what's his story? The man shrugged. Quiet type, overtrained, don't respond to normal praise. Might have come from one of those old government programs. No records, though. Mason knelt by the pen. The dog didn't move. But then, a flicker. His ears twitched. He looked, not at Mason, but at Shadow, who stood beside him now, unmoving, and something passed between them. Recognition. Mason's voice cracked. He's one of them. The deal was quick. Cash handed over. No questions. As they loaded the dog into the truck, the man leaned in and said, Got a few more coming in next month. You'll let me know if you're looking, yeah? Mason didn't reply. On the drive back, the rescued shepherd stayed curled in the corner of the truck bed. Mason didn't touch him, didn't speak. But Shadow? He lay beside him. Close, silent, like a brother keeping vigil. That night, the dog wouldn't eat, wouldn't drink, but he didn't flinch when Mason placed a blanket beside him. And when Shadow settled in beside the blanket, the new shepherd gave the smallest sigh. Barely audible, but real. Mason called Becca first thing the next morning. When she arrived, her face turned grim. This one's deeper in than Shadow. I'll do what I can, but he'll need more than training. He needs a name, a bond, something to remind him he's not a machine. Mason watched as Shadow licked the other dog's ear gently. His name's Echo, Mason said, because he reminds me of everything Shadow used to be, and everything he might have lost. Becca smiled. Then Echo it is. Mason updated his journal. Day 21. Shadow didn't just rescue Echo. He showed him it's okay to rest. Day 23. Echo responded to his name. Just once. But I saw his ears move. That's something. Day 25. Rowan called. Said 2 more leads came in. We're going back out soon. The mission was growing, but so was their family. Mason looked at the 2 shepherds curled beside each other on the living room floor. 2 souls. 2 survivors. And for the first time in a long while, Mason believed this wasn't just rescue. This was redemption. By the time Rowan returned with another lead, Echo had made small but profound strides. He still didn't bark, but his eyes no longer carried that empty, glassy stare. He followed Mason's hand with cautious interest. And Shadow? He had become Echo's silent guide, nudging him gently toward water, circling him when strangers approached, standing beside him like a shield. Rowan arrived with urgency in his voice. "There's a woman. Goes by Mara online. She runs a private shelter, takes in dogs labeled training failures. She's seen pups like Echo. Said one came in just a week ago. Scar on the left flank. Number tattooed behind the ear. Lot number 42. Mason didn't hesitate. "Where?" 4 hours north, Rowan replied. "We leave now." The drive was long and tense. Echo curled beside Shadow in the back seat, eyes half-lidded but awake. He was watching, always watching. Mara's shelter was on the edge of an overgrown forest. It wasn't fancy, just a fenced-in stretch of land with makeshift kennels, tarps for shade, and bowls set out under pine trees. But the moment they arrived, Mason saw something different in the air. Not just hope, freedom. Mara stepped out from the house barefoot, hands smeared with kibble dust. "You the guy Rowan told me about? The one with Shadow?" Mason nodded. Her eyes fell on the pair in the back of the truck. Her breath caught. "That's Echo?" Mason helped him down gently. Shadow followed, tail straight, posture calm. Echo took slow, steady steps, head low, ears twitching. "I had another one like him last week," Mara said softly. "Same freeze stare, same silence, female. We call her Nova. She's inside." When they entered the barn, the scent of hay and antiseptic hung in the air. In the last kennel, a German shepherd lay curled in a tight ball. Her ribs stuck out. Her breathing was shallow. A scar ran across her side, and a faint black tattoo, number 42-7, stood out behind her ear. Mason knelt. "Hey, girl." She didn't lift her head, but when Shadow stepped forward, her ears twitched, and then Echo stepped into view. At first she didn't respond, but the moment their eyes met, hers widened. Echo gave a low whine, not a bark, just the smallest sound. Nova slowly rose, wobbly but upright. She took one step, then another, until she collapsed gently against the kennel wall facing them. Mara covered her mouth with her hands. "They know each other," Mason whispered. Over the next few hours, Nova stayed in her kennel while Echo sat by the door, unmoving. Shadow never left his side. Mason helped Mara clean the pens, fixed a broken water pump, and repaired a section of fencing that had collapsed. When the day drew to a close, Mara brought him a folded paper. "A friend of mine used to train contract dogs. Left the system after one got killed on a demo field. He tracked lot number 42 dogs for years before disappearing. Said the program was unofficially buried when the results were too obedient. Unpredictably obedient." She pointed to a name scribbled at the bottom. "Dr. Lowell Crane, Ashgrove, Utah." Mason exhaled. "This is getting bigger than we thought." Mara's face turned grim. "You think they just stopped after one bad batch? If they discarded dogs like Shadow and Echo, they didn't stop the process. They just hit it deeper." That night, Mason stayed in the truck bed with the dogs. Nova's kennel was moved beside the vehicle so Echo could remain near. At one point in the night, Mason awoke to a soft rustling. Nova was standing. Not pacing, not panicking, just standing, watching Echo. He nudged the wire once. She stepped forward and touched noses through the fence. And then, she wagged her tail. Just once, but it was enough. Mason updated his journal. Day 30. Echo made a sound. A whine. A real one. Day 31. Nova stood on her own and made eye contact. Day 32. Shadow led them both to the fence gate this morning. He knows we're moving soon. He always knows. Before they left Mara's, she handed Mason a thumb drive. It's all I have. Logs, footage, names of buyers. Aegis covered their tracks, but there are cracks. You keep going. I'll keep them safe here. Mason promised to return. Nova wasn't ready to leave. But Echo? He stepped into the truck willingly this time. No leash, no lift. He just followed Shadow. On the drive south, Mason felt the first weight of purpose anchor in his chest. He wasn't just chasing shadows anymore. He was building something. Rowan called as they crossed into Utah. I booked you a meet with Crane. But Mason, this guy's a ghost. If he agrees to talk, it's because he sees something in what you're doing. Mason looked in the rear view. Shadow's head rested beside Echo's. The wind played through their fur like a whisper. I don't care if he's a ghost, Mason said. If he helped build this mess, he's going to help us tear it down. And from the back, as if understanding every word, Shadow thumped his tail twice against the truck bed. For the first time in weeks, Mason smiled. The road ahead was long, but they weren't walking it alone anymore. The sky was a heavy slate as Mason pulled the truck onto the narrow dirt road leading up to Ash Grove, Utah. The air smelled sharp with pine and frost, a biting reminder that winter's edge was near. Echo sat quietly in the back, nestled next to Shadow, while Mason stared ahead, heart pounding with a mix of dread and determination. The name Dr. Lowell Crane had haunted him since Mara had handed over the thumb drive. A man shrouded in mystery, linked to the darkest corners of the obedience program that had scarred so many dogs. Rowan's voice crackled over the radio. You sure you're ready for this? Mason exhaled, his breath fogging the windshield. I have to be. For them. For all of us. The truck rumbled over a rough bridge and slowed to a stop outside a weathered two-story house, half hidden behind tall pines. The windows were shuttered, the porch sagging, and the faded sign barely readable. Crane Research Facility. Private. As Mason stepped out, Shadow immediately positioned himself between Mason and the house, low and alert, muscles taut. Echo padded softly behind, tail barely wagging, eyes watching. The door creaked open before Mason could knock. A tall man, his hair silvered but wild like a storm, stood in the frame. His eyes were sharp, calculating, and haunted. You Mason? He asked, without a greeting. Yes. And you're Lowell Crane. The man's gaze flickered to Shadow and Echo. So the rumors were true. You found them. We want answers, Mason said, steady but firm. Why too obedient? Why discard them? What was the real goal? Crane's lips twitched. You have no idea what you're meddling in. He stepped aside, motioning them in. But come in. We need to talk. And you need to see what I've been hiding. Inside, the house was cluttered, files stacked, equipment covered in dust. On a desk, Mason spotted photos of German shepherds in training, some with visible scars, others with serene faces like shadows, but eyes full of torment. Crane sat, fingers steepled. Lot number 42 was part of a covert government program. They needed dogs that could follow orders without question. No hesitation, no fear, no conscience. Soldiers, weapons, reconnaissance. But some dogs were too perfect, too obedient. They lacked the unpredictability that makes a soldier useful in chaos. Mason frowned. Too obedient? That's insane! Crane nodded grimly. They wanted fighters, not robots. When dogs like these failed to display aggression or independent decision-making, they were discarded, abandoned, sold, marked as failures. Mason's fists clenched. And what about the scars? The silence? The broken souls? Training methods were harsh, punishments severe. Any sign of weakness was erased. Crane's voice softened, almost a whisper. I left when I realized what we'd become, more factory than family. Echo stirred beside Mason, nuzzling his hand. Shadow growled low in his throat. Crane pulled out a small device, a recording. Listen. A chilling video played. Dogs trained with electric collars, harsh commands, brutal drills. One German shepherd froze, then dropped silently as a handler screamed orders. Another whimpered, breaking down. Mason's eyes stung. They were tortured. Yes, and then erased. The program was shut down officially, but unofficially many dogs were dumped, sold, or worse. Crane's eyes darkened. I kept files, proof. I wanted to expose them, but threats followed. I had to disappear. Mason swallowed hard. What can we do now? Crane reached into a drawer, pulling out a thick binder. This has names, locations, buyers. There's more dogs out there like Echo and Nova. We can find them, help them. Suddenly, a sharp noise outside. A vehicle engine. Mason tensed, signaling Shadow. Before anyone could react, the door burst open. Men in dark uniforms flooded in, armed, their faces grim beneath caps. Crane, you're coming with us. And that dog, one officer pointed at Echo, belongs to the government. Mason stepped forward, voice low but fierce. You're not taking him. Not without a fight. Shadow lunged, snarling, teeth bared. The room erupted into chaos. Mason grabbed Echo, shielding him as the dogs growled and snapped, trying to protect their pack. In the scuffle, Mason managed to break free, bolting out the back door with Echo in his arms. Shadow and Nova followed closely, their powerful strides carrying them through the thick trees. The officers shouted behind, but the forest swallowed the sounds. Mason ran blindly until his lungs burned and legs trembled. Finally, he collapsed near a creek, Echo trembling in his arms but alive. Rowan's voice came over the radio again. Mason, you okay? Where are you? Near Ashgrove. We're out, but they know. We need to move fast. Days blurred into nights as Mason, Rowan, Mara, and Crane regrouped in a hidden safe house. The fight to expose the cruelty of the program had begun. Echo and Nova slowly recovered, their spirits rekindled by care, patience, and the love of their newfound family. Shadow remained the ever-watchful guardian, a silent hero who had led them through darkness into hope. Mason looked at them. 4 souls once broken, now healing together. The scars remained, but so did the strength. He spoke softly. They thought obedience was a flaw, but I see loyalty, courage, heart, and we'll make sure the world knows their story. The night sky stretched endlessly above. Somewhere beyond, other dogs like Echo waited, for rescue, for freedom, for a second chance. Mason tightened his grip on Echo's collar and whispered, We're coming. We're not giving up. The journey was far from over. But for the first time, Mason believed in a future where discarded souls could become legends.